Today, most central vacuum systems in houses that have carpeting are equipped with some kind of a rotating brush attachment. And there are motor-driven brushes and there are air-driven brushes. While the air-driven brushes, also called turbine power heads, have had an interesting history, they are still used and historically were used very commonly on central vacuum systems and to a lesser extent portable canister vacuums. And if you're going to talk about the history of turbine power heads, then starting at the beginning, the TUEC school tool is, to my knowledge, the very first turbine power head. So if you had a school, you wanted to put a central vacuum system in, and you selected a TUEC from the United Electric Company, you could have gotten one of these. This is a turbine power head, but it does not use a turbine to drive a brush roll. It uses a turbine actually to propel the whole thing. And the idea was that you would set it underneath a row of desks at the front of the schoolroom, and you would let it crawl underneath that row of desks, and it would vacuum underneath. And then when it got to the end of the row of desks, you, the janitor, would pull on the hose, and a couple things would happen. A clutch would disengage the turbine drive, and the wheels would pivot a little bit so that the thing would then track on the other set of legs on the desk, and it would clean underneath the desks. Kind of a crazy thing. I can't imagine how well it worked on the 30 inches of water lift that a TUEC gave you, but I don't know, maybe someday I'll hit the Central Vac lottery and I'll find one of these in a schoolhouse basement somewhere. But the first turbine power head that used the air power to actually drive a roller brush is, to my knowledge, the Preco. And here's a Preco. This is from the 60s. They might have developed them in the 50s also. Preco Incorporated, as far as I can tell, this is the only thing they ever made. They didn't make vacuums, and they didn't make, I don't know, this is the only thing that I've heard of that said Preco on it, but I haven't really researched too heavily. This one, you can see I've had to fix the elbow because it was just a cheap plastic elbow. It broke off, and so the best way I found to fix it was with a Fairfax rug tool elbow. But this has a roller of about 3/4 of an inch diameter, and the turbine itself is also nothing real big. There is the little plastic turbine here, and there is a flywheel on the other side, and you can see it's got nice metal pieces to it, but you can see the gear teeth are spaced widely apart. The bristles are kind of spaced widely apart. They are horsehair. They're nice and soft. So it'll give you a little more agitation than you could get with a rug tool, but I don't think anybody who used one of these thought that it would outclean their good old Hoover, unfortunately. But this was kind of it. And here it doesn't slow down very much because the brush is floating in the housing. And also because most all of these turbine power heads, because they need the air to be constantly flowing and they can't airlock down to the carpet or they will stop working, they have some kind of relief holes to allow the thing to still breathe when it's set down on the carpet. And the Preco also had a little clean out plug that you could pull out here and get the Lego block or whatever. Because one of the kind of Achilles heels of these is that it's not clean air driving the turbine, it's always dirty air, and so the mechanism just gets messed up, sometimes more quickly than others. After Preco, I think the next one to come along was made by Dupro of Switzerland. This is called the TK2. Very common brush in the maybe 70s, definitely 80s. This is all plastic. It's much lighter weight. You can see by the size of it, it's going to have a similarly sized small turbine. It's also got a couple of relief holes and a brush that's spring-loaded. any one of these, depending on the carpet you use it on, could be either a very good performer or a very underwhelming performer. And the challenge is the customer does not know whether it's just their carpet that their attachment is a bad match for. They just think, oh, this vacuum's a piece of junk, it just doesn't work. And oftentimes it's just the attachment. It's not properly selected. This is a version of the TK2 that Airvac spec'd. I don't know if anybody else bought this or if this was something that they made just for Airvac, because Airvac bought so many of them, but you can see they have modified. They've got a different up and down swivel here and some rear wheels and no relief holes in it. Airvac was big on turbine power heads. They did offer an electric power head, but they used to sell their bagless systems with an 1.5-inch hose to allow optimum performance of these turbine heads, but it was still a wire reinforced hose, so that's that. This one doesn't sound unpleasant. It's doesn't have that kind of shrillness to it. So you lift it off the carpet. Well, there existed a need for a more substantial turbine-driven power head that could compete with the electric power heads that had started to become available, and of course upright vacuum cleaners. And the development of such a brush was undertaken by HP Products, makers of the VacuFlow system, and in the early 80s they developed this. Could have been mid-80s, I'm not sure of the year, but this is the T21. And they made the turbine much larger, about twice the diameter, about 4 inches. They mounted it in the same orientation, vertically. So that gave this thing the height of almost a Kirby. Not something that you could really vacuum under furniture easily. Underneath you can see they've made the brush roll much larger diameter. They have put a beater bar strip in opposing the bristle strip. It's got an auger design. It's kind of throwing everything off to one side. Actually it would be this side. The base plate on this is a casting, presumably aluminum plated, and I think the purpose of making this a casting was just so that it had some weight to it, some heft, because this needs to have some weight to make it bear down on the carpet, otherwise it'll just skim. And that's part of the issue, that you need your vacuum to have a little bit of a grab, otherwise they're not going to think it's doing anything. Double ball bearings, one at each end. They just kind of gave the Preco and the Dupro some steroids, and this is what happened. So this was available through parts houses as the T21, and you could also get the T21 Mini, also called the Rug Rat. This was developed around the same time. This is a nice little hand-sized brush for doing the stairs, etc., because if you tried to use this on the stairs, it would be a kind of a challenge. You can hear how much more powerful that sounds. Later, VacuFlow changed the design without changing the guts of it and called it the Carpet Cat. And this was sold only through VacuFlow with VacuFlow systems. You couldn't buy the Carpet Cat just for through a parts house. So that continued to be distributed as the T21 for open source. But you can see underneath it's the same thing. This one is from 1989 per the date code. Other one's from 87. Well, of course, the big complaint about that was just the height, the physical size of the thing was just not practical. And HP then refined the Carpet Cat to be called the Turbocat or the T210 if it was sold through a parts distributor. And this is an original T210. There's some very funny marketing wank on the box here. Carefree, exciting cleaning spirit. Decorator design, high-tech color. Whatever the hell that means. I guess that means it's the same color as a computer. But they have taken that 4-inch vertical turbine and they have mounted it horizontally. So the shaft is now vertical, and in order to accommodate that, the belt has a twist in it, just like the belt on a sanitaire upright. On these original versions, the brush roll, slightly smaller diameter, but it had opposing rows of longer, softer white nylon bristles and shorter, stiffer orange nylon bristles. And the bottom plate is now just a stamped piece of sheet metal, so to give the thing a little bit of weight, there is just a little piece of, I guess, iron or whatever, probably not lead, sitting one here, one there, just to give a thing a little bit of heft. And so these are the most common turbine power heads that you'll see, this kind of T-shaped design. These have been everywhere for the last 30 years. And they do work. I mean, they sound like a dental drill. This one's got some other funny sounds going on with it, just from it being nearly 30 years old, but they work at keeping a clean carpet clean. They don't like a whole lot of animal hair or human hair or debris. And that's just kind of an inherent problem that's hard to get around. But the next version of the Turbocat, or the T210, was the TP210. They gave this the TurboFlex 2 agitator. You can see the housings are the same. The turbine is the same. The brush roll now has a chevron pattern which sweeps the dirt towards the intake, and it's that longer, softer, happens to be orange, but it's closer to the white bristles on the old one. And so this doesn't do a very aggressive sweeping job, but it also doesn't bog down very much because of that. It runs at kind of a higher speed, kind of like an Orex brush roll. And this was available in the mid to late 90s. This example is from 99. Starting in the early 2000s, they updated the design again, and they gave it a deep sweep agitator, and that's what this agitator is called. And this is quite an effective design, both at agitating and sweeping the carpet, and also at getting wound up with hair and threads. And you've got all these little bristle tufts that contact the carpet on their own. They each produce a little sweep, a little vibration of their own. And so this really can make plush carpeting look very nice when it's running properly. And this version, which is from 2002, is one of a special series that was available from HP, the translucent series. And I think these are neat because you can actually see the mechanism through there. And they made green, and they made a light blue and a dark blue and a burgundy, and so it's kind of hard to find one of these that's not trashed already, but I'm happy to have two examples of the green. And I'd love to find, they did make a clear demonstrator model. You can see this also happens to be the sort of hose that you would have gotten in a vacuum flow system around this time period, all the way from the mid-90s through the late 2000s when they came out with the Easy Grip hose. But after that, HP totally revised the design, and they came out with the Turbocat Zoom, also known as the Turbocat EX, or the Turbocat Pro Series if you're thinkvacuums.com. Boo hiss. This one, you can see they've changed the housing, they've updated the design a little bit, they have given the wheels some nice nylon bearings, they have given the brush roll some nice thread guards to stop the hair from working its way into the bearings, and that helps somewhat. They have made the brush roll out of plastic with little rollers, so this won't ruin your floors like a metal plate would if you try to use this thing on your hard floors. But they have also given this, instead of a geared belt like every other power head we've seen, they have given this a poly V belt to run a little bit more quietly. Well, the thing with that is the geared belt does not need very much tension. It just kind of barely needs to be against the teeth of the brush roll and the drive shaft. This needs to have probably twice as much tension in order to run, so it has more natural resistance to it, and so one of these will run more slowly than the original. Not that much more slowly, as long as you've got a good power unit driving it, but I also found that whatever plastic this is more brittle. You get these little fractures. Some of them are not a big deal, but other times that kind of, like the necks break a lot on these, and then you got to take the whole thing apart. But all in all, I mean, they've made some nice design improvements. They've got an overmolded rubber bumper on this. This obviously has been through the mill already. It's had quite a bit of use. It's from 2011, it appears. So in the meantime, other manufacturers have done some developments. That's still the most common turbine power head is the Turbocat. But this is a Wessel-Werk product that's been available for 20 plus years now. This is called the TK270. And this is actually an air relief vent, so that if this thing is sealed down on carpet that won't breathe, this will let some air in to keep the turbine moving. And you've got a removable clean out door, still not a very large turbine, but quite a large air path. So this can actually pass a larger object than a Turbocat can. However, the brush roll being smaller diameter with softer bristles does tend to wind with hair more readily than a Turbocat. So pick your poison. Nice little rollers. Keep it from, if you wanted to take this and go from rug to floor to back to rug, you could do it. And the squeegee blades also will help you in that way. It's interesting, that doesn't really slow down at all when you put it down on the rug. All of these smaller turbines rely on the brush being spring-loaded and kind of floating, where the Turbocat, because of that larger turbine, it has the torque that you can dig into the carpet a little more, and it's weighted so that it can do that. That's what those weights are for. Wessel has, since the TK270, introduced the TK284, which is this guy here, private labeled for Cyclovac, and I have made this into a soft clean edition, because this does not have that vent on the top. This is a nice little brush if you have area rugs that don't have any dirt on them. And it does a beautiful job. And nice and quiet. And since the TK284, they have now come out with the TK286, and that has a little relief vent on top and a more aggressive brush roll with shorter, stiffer bristles. And that's been a nice little brush. And finally, another turbine power head that's not quite a turbine power head. This is the bare floor turbine, so it's called. And you can see the brush roll rotates, but it is not driven by a belt and a separate turbine. The brush roll, you could say, is the turbine. And what happens is only when this is placed against a hard surface will this begin to rotate. And you see it's not doing anything, but we put it down. And the idea is that when this is rotating, these brushes are kind of sweeping the floor, kind of buffing or pulling little bits of stuff that are stuck to the floor off of it. I was never terribly impressed by this, but I'm impressed by the thought that went into it. It's an interesting concept. Well, anyway, here's my brief history of turbine power heads. I hope you enjoyed it, and I thank you for watching.